As we all know, Breath of the Wild was a game that set the bar high in many areas, though many can agree that at times there seemed to be a lack of a variety of enemies. In today's video, we're going to go over just what enemies could potentially be seen in Breath of the Wild 2. Now, I won't just pick and choose enemies that I personally like to make a return, because if that would be the case, this video would be filled with bubble enemies. Those guys are just so wacky. So instead of it just being my personal preference, I would try to analyze just what we know from the previous Zelda entries, with how Breath of the Wild ended, and as well with what we have seen in the Breath of the Wild 2 trailer. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to leave a like, and if you want to further support the channel and keep up with my content, I would greatly appreciate if you subscribed. But enough about that, let's get started. To begin, I just want to clarify that these lists of returning enemies were all chosen based on the following criteria. They are all found in games where Ganondorf is the head honcho, being Ocarina of Time, Wind Waker, and Twilight Princess. Why am I going based off of this? Well, although never mentioned, I believe Ganondorf does have some sort of influence on the monsters that wreak havoc throughout all of Hyrule. So it makes sense that 1, he creates some of them, 2, he has them serve him, or 3, he imposes his will on them. Which 2 and 3 could mostly be the same, just depends whether they're sentient or not. The other criteria for my list of returning enemies is that they either have somewhat of a connection to how Breath of the Wild ended, or what we have seen in the Breath of the Wild 2 trailer. Albeit we haven't seen much, but with a year and a half of speculating, we have somewhat of an idea. So to begin the list, we're going to start off with Peahats. Now before you call me out on them, I know they weren't an enemy in Twilight Princess, but they did make an appearance in helping you traverse the Sky Temple. In Ocarina of Time, there were huge organic flower-like enemies that attack you when you invade their territory. In Wind Waker, they didn't look as menacingly, but man were they annoying. In a good way though, if that's a thing. You guys get me. Based off Ocarina of Time, they are an organic plant-based enemy that attack during the day and lay dormant during the night, which would go very well with how interactive the enemies in Breath of the Wild are with the environment they are located in. Peahats would fit perfectly with how the Breath of the Wild enemies interacted with the great day and night cycle implemented in the game. From a short glimpse in the Breath of the Wild 2 trailer, we see Hyrule Castle being lifted up into the sky. Now, I know this is just a game, but if something like this were to actually happen, it would cause a drastic change in the topography, which is known to greatly affect vegetation, which could perfectly explain the resurgence of these autonomous organic beings patrolling Hyrule Field. Thus, they would be an excellent addition. Next on the list could be described with just one word.
The Zonai.
The Zonai. The Zonai.
The hottest Zelda subject since the release of the trailer. So what enemy could make a return that would fit in with what we have seen of the Zonai culture? Well, we have seen a lot of statues of the Zonai constructed many years ago, and if temples and dungeons are a thing in Breath of the Wild 2, then we will definitely see more of those statues. So I believe Zonai Armos at this point are inevitable. There could even be different variants depending on what statue it is, owl, dragon, or boar. I mean, just imagine. You're walking through an eerie part of the jungle, or better yet, a Zonai temple. As you're walking through a dimly lit corridor, you pass by your 4th owl Zonai statue, and all of a sudden, its eyes glow green. It sheathes its weapon and bursts out a sudden attack. This would add elements of what we have already seen in Breath of the Wild, but give us something new that many people would not expect at all. I know I said I would keep this purely analytical, but just the thought of this happening, just the thought of a Zonai Armos being in the game, well, in my opinion, would make Breath of the Wild 2 that much better. Now to move on to a group of enemies that all kind of fall in the same category. Aonuma let us know that Breath of the Wild 2 was going to be a much darker game than Breath of the Wild. So what enemies could make this game much more darker than Breath of the Wild? My answer to that is Stalfos. With the awakening of Ganondorf, there's a possibility that the magic containing Ganondorf, or the malice that burst out of his corpse, affects the remains of the Hyrule warriors that perished 100 years ago. It would be very dark to see Link and possibly Zelda fight against the dead skeletal warriors that lived during their lifetime. The developers could make it even more morbid by making the Stalfos people that Link and Zelda knew. With the introduction of the Stalfos, they would be the first somewhat humanoid enemy which could potentially have a variety of types. Some could be sword users, others could use spears, and some could even use axes or hammers. With the way the narrative in Breath of the Wild 2 seems to be going, these dead skeletal warriors would fit right in. Talking about the dead is a perfect segue to the next enemies, Re-Deads. And while at it, we can add Gibdos to it as well. Now yes, I know they're different enemies, but the only difference separating them is that one is mummified and the other is dadified. Because you get it? Dad, dad, mommy, mommy, dad. Oh man, I crack myself up. This keeps in line with the darker theme that we may see in Breath of the Wild 2, and with the underground exploration seen in the trailer. Redeads and Gibdos make perfect sense. I mean, look at how shriveled up Ganondorf looks. He looks like a Redead already. So it's safe to say that Redeads could easily take on an appearance that is somewhat similar to the Gerudo King. I believe the awakening of Ganondorf is going to have quite the cataclysmic effect on all of Hyrule, including the catacombs located underneath Hyrule. This could also be a great explanation on the origin of these enemies. Now that I think about it, it's not just Redeads and Gibdos, but Stalfos as well. They are bodily remains, so it would make sense if they were all to come back to life at the cause of some dark force or some dark spirit. Which leads me into the last enemy that I believe we will see in Breath of the Wild 2. What could be scarier and darker than weaponized skeletons and an undead army? None other than the spirits that have escaped from these remains, Poes. Now I will admit, the appearance of Poes have changed throughout the games in the series. For example, Twilight Princess have these scary Grim Reaper types, while Wind Waker have these frolicking circus clowns looking kind of things. Taking into consideration once more the direction Breath of the Wild 2 is leaning towards, I would assume that the Poes will look something a bit more similar to what they look like in Twilight Princess. Again, with the awakening of more evil forces, these could easily be enemies that appear in certain areas of Hyrule once the clock hits midnight. Poes will make perfect sense as they could be the restless spirits of those who perished 100 years ago, who are now corrupted either by malice or Ganondorf's dark magic. I am really excited for what Breath of the Wild 2 has in store for us, and can only hope that some, or at least one of the enemies I talk about, make their reappearance. I have my fingers crossed for the Zonai Armos. But that's just me. I want to hear more from you guys. What enemies do you think Breath of the Wild 2 will bring to the table? Or what enemies do you want to see? Let me know in the comments. Again, thank you all for the support you give to this channel. I literally wouldn't be doing this if it wasn't for you guys. Thank you. Till next time, I'm Ace Monkey. Have a great day. Thanks for watching.